English translation, 605th Contact Friday, the 19th of December, 2014, 23:11 hours.
Ah, you're coming together. You are both welcome, but what gives me the pleasure of both of you coming here?
Greetings too, Edward. Now, it's actually the case that you want to talk to me about something. At least Florina told me so. And that we come here together is due to the fact that Florina wants to walk around the site for some time.
Yes, that is the reason I came here, but I thought that I would first greet you and tell you that I was walking around in the field for some time. Greetings, then.
But it's not exactly nice weather to represent your feet, as we say, because it's raining.
Which doesn't stop me from going around because I can protect myself from the rain.
Of course I know.
Then I'll go now and say goodbye.
Goodbye too, and enjoy your walk.
You called Florina and said that it was desirable for you that I come here again today. What's going on?
First, I want to say that I am glad that you are still in the area, and that you could still come here this night. And secondly, our correction work on Guido's book has shown that I cannot cope with certain formulations, namely the terms mass and weight, as well as weightlessness and zero gravity. My logic tells me that a mass can probably change in terms of its consistency, density and volume, both on Earth and in world space. Thus it can condense or expand through whatever circumstances, but it remains in its entirety as a mass and thus becomes more or less, only in the way that it expands or contracts. As a result, the mass as such always remains the same and only changes physically or in volume. But every mass now also has a weight, and this is in and of itself unchangeable, and that regardless of whether on Earth or in space, and thus also in so-called weightlessness. But now, it is asserted by earthly scientists that through the increase of weightlessness, and through the fact that gravity no longer exists, a weightlessness arises, just as in the space of the world, where there is no perceptible force of gravity, and therefore no one can be measured. I find this assertion illogical and contradict my reason, because no matter whether gravity or gravitation is given or not, the given weight remains the same. Thus, according to earthly measure, 100 kilograms are exactly the same weight on Earth as on the Moon, on an asteroid or comet. Consequently, the weight does not become lighter, but remains in its weight measure. What changes is only the gravitational attraction ratio, which is followed by the fact that the 100 kilograms appear to be lighter on the Moon than on Earth due to the lower gravitational attraction, although they remain constant at 100 kilograms. This apparent lightness of weight in the world dream, in freefall or on the Moon, is explained by earthly scientists as weightlessness or weight reduction, which however contradicts my understanding of logic, because by a reduced or cancelled attraction a weight cannot be reduced, but it remains the same, if nothing of it is taken away. So I think that scientists start from false assumptions and do not stick to reality and try to explain something they don't understand. It is also possible, however, that they simply have no idea what it is really about. When a reduction in attraction seems to reduce a weight, our dear Whaley has apparently led into the field. Also, I do not know of any such term that could be used for the apparent lightening of the weight and explain the matter.
I am familiar with this problem of the lack of concepts in relation to what you are referring to, although we do have a corresponding name for it if a weight is apparently reduced or even eliminated by a reduction or complete suspension of the gravitational force. We call this state, when I translate our term into the German language, anti-gravitation-status, which in the sense of your question expresses that it is a matter of an annulment of the gravitational pull of the body in question or of a material in which the outer gravitation becomes ineffective. Every matter on Earth, for example a human body, has its own weight and thus also its own gravity, although this is extremely small in relation to Earth's gravity and cannot be consciously felt by Earth's inhabitants. The fact is, however, that only this dead weight together with the dead gravitation makes it possible for the body to be attracted by Earth's gravitation. This means that only if something has an own weight, and thus only a minimal own gravitation in the nanoscale, can it be attracted by an external gravitational force. However, if something is given that has neither a dead weight nor a dead gravitation, then it cannot be attracted by an external gravitation. It must therefore be understood that every matter, however small it may be, has its own gravity and thus attracts other material, even the tiniest bacteria. Also, Earth naturally has its own large force of attraction, which is also called gravitation, gravity, or even force of attraction. This gravitation causes bodies to attract each other with the corresponding force depending on their mass and the distance between them. The closer they are to each other, the more they attract each other. If one body is much heavier than the other, it also pulls much harder on the one that has a lower weight. On Earth, this can, of course, only be determined by extremely sensitive measuring instruments, but in comparison also by the use of magnets. If, however, the outer gravitational force is weakened or even eliminated, as in the case of the outer planetary layers, up to nearby space, then any outer matter loses its own attraction according to its own weight, which results in an anti-gravitational status for it, which is erroneously called weightlessness by earthly scientists. But this does not correspond to the correctness, because every matter, thus also the human body, does not become weightless, but only an anti-gravity status takes place, which means that it escapes from the planetary gravity. The body thus escapes the external gravitational force and influence of Earth. And the further the body moves away from Earth gravity, the smaller it becomes and gives it the possibility that it attracts some material by its own gravitational pull, even if these may only be very small quantities. If, for example, the International Space Station ISS is taken as a comparison in this respect, then it is still in a gravitational orbit of Earth, but due to its size it already has a low inherent gravity through which it can draw materials from space. So there is no weightlessness. As it refers to your question, because it is a weight deception that appears as fact in reality, but in reality is not really given and contradicts the effective fact, because it is only apparently existing, given, and present. In any case, a weight always remains of the same weight, regardless of whether there is a light or large gravitational force. This only determines whether a weight is more or less attractive than a stronger or weaker gravitational force.
Interesting, because that hits exactly the point apparently that Willie brought up. And that this is actually the case. As you say, it can also be proven on Earth-Moon because there is no uniform gravitational force there, but it varies greatly in different places, as your father Schwath explained to me in the 1940s.
Willie, who is he? But what my father has told you corresponds to correctness.
You do not know. Whaley is as good as a friendly nickname, and we call Ulrich Nangwe Whaley, a true sunshine. A passive member with German citizenship, but native of Cameroon, Africa. But another thing, when we talk about weight, it only refers to the units of weight that we use here on Earth, such as the units milligram, microgram, gram, nanogram, pound, kilogram, hundredweight, and ton in the large part of the European area, whereby the whole thing also depends on the gravitational force. So inevitably on other worlds as well as on our moon, on asteroids and comets, completely different amounts of the same materials are necessary, depending on the gravitational strength, in order to obtain the same weight as with us on Earth. So materials can be much lighter and thus planet etc. can show less gravitational force. Or materials can be much heavier because planet etc. shows much greater gravitational force, as a result of denser, that is to say more compact matter, resulting in much greater gravitational force. The gravitational force is also dependent on the speed of rotation of Earth as well as the temperature, respectively cold and heat, in such a way that these have an influence on the density and consistency of the matter, as your father Svath already explained to me in my youth, as well as your daughter Sim Yase, after our contacts began in 1975.
I guess I don't have to explain anything else about that.
Then look here. I read this newspaper article today in the Zürcher Oberländer. The point is that in the USA, many people apparently become more pregnant with humanity and reason and begin to doubt the death penalty. Can you say something about the rationale behind this?
This little article is interesting. Various factors play together here. On the one hand, the fact that in recent decades many death sentences have had to be recognized as misjudgments due to the rise of forensics, revoked, and the innocent convicted rehabilitated and released back to freedom. This gave and gives people in the USA a lot to think about, with a guilty conscience and a complicit feeling of guilt that, as pro-death penalty advocates, they contributed to the execution of innocent people sentenced to death. On the other hand, there are the influences caused by the anti-death penalty demonstrators in death penalty executions, which slowly influence the pro-death penalty advocates and make them think. But it is also the worldwide anti-death penalty movements, including the association FIGU, that cause people to reflect on their humanity and reason. And it is precisely these movements, which are active throughout the world, that are exerting a very great influence on the fact that for some time now a turning point has been looming in the USA, too, towards less and less applying the death penalty and abolishing it as far as possible. The latter, however, is repeatedly endangered by anarchistic and capital criminal machinations of irresponsible individuals, extreme groups, and organizations.
This means that the trend of the growing doubts about the death penalty can change negatively again, for example by the bloodthirsty and murderous machinations of the IS or Islamist State.
Yes, unfortunately this is possible, because Earthlings, even if they turn to the good, are fickle and are influenced again and again by negative views, opinions, and behaviors of those who are completely irresponsible with regard to honesty, humanity, justice, peace, freedom, and harmony, as well as contentment, etc. They are taken away again by these human degenerates from a good way once seized. If they are long enough in their range or are steered and pulled by mass movements again into the old malicious and inhuman ways.
I can understand that because I have often witnessed such changes in people, so I can sing a song about it. If people lead a righteous life and have the same kind of behavior, then it is very quickly possible that they will go astray, degenerate, become criminal, felonious, extremist, and disturbed in behavior, as well as vindictive, retaliatory, delusional, bloodthirsty, and murderous through being fanaticized and radicalized. And this also applies to people who have found their way back from a degenerate and unrighteous way of life into a normal and righteous life. Because when they again fall into the clutches of other people, be they criminals, religionists, sectarians, or terrorists, etc., they can again be fanaticized and radicalized by their delusion. If this happens, then they inevitably fall back again into the old behaviors.
This is indeed the case, although when a relapse into the old forms occurs, the degenerated behaviors become much worse than before.
This also applies to us, because it is said that when a person abandons evil and degenerate behavior and becomes righteous, but then falls back into the old machinations and behavior, he then behaves worse and becomes 7 times degenerate and more malicious than before.
There's actually something about that.
Unfortunately, the people of Earth are not yet in that conscious and righteous stage of development as you play and are. It is true that we have individuals and small groups on Earth who are consciously quite progressive and can therefore also be called righteous. Unfortunately, however, even these are far from being immune enough that they can no longer be turned into aberrations by psychologically sophisticated delusions of religious sectarian, political and terrorist fanaticism, radicalization, and other delusions. This also includes criminal, felonious, and other influences which can lead to degeneration or which can cause Earthlings to become degenerate again, especially if torture or other violent measures threaten or are applied. There can also be personal advantages or fear, as well as some delusional indoctrination, through which even righteous people can fall into some kind of degeneration from the ground up. But it is also possible that those who have found their way back to the right path of righteousness through certain circumstances of purification will relapse. Unfortunately, Earthlings are not yet immune in any way to degenerations and evil, bad and unrighteous things, so that they are susceptible to all evils appearing in this respect, as has been the case since time immemorial, and unfortunately will remain so for a long time to come.
Which I'm afraid you're right about.
I'm afraid that's the way it's going to be. But now, dear friend, I have something unpleasant. With Bernadette, the 14th part of the Guido book has disappeared from the computer, and since I have given everything processed and edited together with you to her, and she had saved it, I threw everything into the trash. Fortunately, Piero was able to retrieve one of us two still unprocessed versions, so we can and must revise and edit them together.
This is indeed unpleasant, but we will do our duty.
There's no other way. But if it is all right with you, then I have some things I would like to discuss with you, if that is possible. But the whole thing should be discussed privately.
Of course.
Well then, the following.